Chapter 13. Sanctuary. Madame de Plougastel and Aline sat waiting in that handsome house on the Rue du Paradis, deep into the late afternoon of that endless day of horror. They were surrounded by perpetual alarms, the crack of musketry, rolling drums, and the distant muttering of angry mobs. They were no longer waiting for Regain. They realized that this friendly messenger would not return, whatever the reason might be, and by now there were no doubt many reasons. They waited without knowing what they were waiting for. They simply waited for whatever might happen next. Earlier in the afternoon, the roar of battle had approached them. It raced swiftly in their direction, swelling in volume and horror with every passing moment. It was the frenzied clamor of a mob drunk on blood and bent on destruction. Nearby, that fierce wave of humanity paused in its violent progress. Then came the blows of pikes against a door, along with demanding calls to open it. After that came the tearing of wood, the shattering of glass, and screams of terror blending with screams of rage. Running beneath these shrill sounds was the deep, rumbling sound of bestial laughter. The mob was hunting two wretched Swiss guardsmen who were blindly seeking escape. They tracked the guards to a nearby house and cruelly beat them to death. Once their work was done, the hunters, both men and women, formed a makeshift battalion. They came swinging down the Rue du Paradis, chanting the Song of Marseilles. It was a new song to Paris in those days. Allons, enfants de la patrie. Le jour de gloire est arrivé. Contre nous de la tyrannie. L'étendard sanglant est levé. The dread sound came nearer, raucously bawled by hundreds of voices. This harsh anthem had suddenly replaced the merry, trivial air of the
CAIRA,
which had been the playful tune of the revolution until now. Madame de Plougastel and Aline clung to each other instinctively. They had heard the destruction of the other house in their neighborhood without knowing the reason for it. What if it was now the turn of the Hotel Plougastel? There was no real cause to fear an attack, but amid such confusing and terrifying turmoil, they could only expect the worst. The dreadful song and the thunder of heavy boots on the roughly paved street passed by and finally faded away. They breathed again, feeling almost as if a miracle had saved them. But a fresh alarm gripped them an instant later. Madame's young footman, Jacques, the most trusted of her servants, burst into the room unceremoniously with a scared face. He announced that a man had just climbed over the garden wall. The intruder claimed to be a friend of Madame's and demanded to see her immediately.
but he looks like a revolutionary, madam.
The staunch fellow warned her. Her thoughts and hopes leaped at once to Regain.
Bring him in,
She commanded breathlessly. Jacques went out and returned a moment later with a tall man. The stranger wore a long, shabby, and oversized overcoat, along with a wide-brimmed hat turned down all around and adorned with an enormous tricolor cockade. He removed the hat as he entered. Jacques stood behind him and noticed that the man's hair, though now messy, showed signs of having been carefully styled. It was tied back and carried lingering traces of powder. The young footman wondered what could be on the man's face, which was turned away from him, to make his mistress cry out and recoil in shock. Then, she abruptly dismissed Jacques with a wave of her hand. The newcomer advanced to the middle of the salon, breathing hard and moving like an exhausted man. He leaned against a table and faced Madame de Plougastel. She stood looking at him with a strange horror in her eyes. In the background, Aline sat on a bench at the far end of the salon. She stared in bewilderment and fear at the man's face. It was smeared with a mask of blood and dust, making it almost unrecognizable, yet it felt strangely familiar. Then the man spoke, and she instantly recognized the voice. It was the Marquis de la Tour d'Azyr.
my dear friend.
He said,
Please forgive me if I startled you. Forgive me for forcing my way in here without permission at such a time and in such a manner. But you can see how things are for me. I am a fugitive. During my frantic flight, I did not know which way to turn for safety, so I thought of you. I told myself that if I could just reach your house safely, I might find sanctuary. You are in danger?
She asked.
In danger?
He almost seemed to laugh silently at the unnecessary question.
If I were to show myself openly in the streets right now, I might be lucky to live for 5 minutes. My friend, it has been a massacre. A few of us escaped from the Tuileries Palace at the very end, only to be hunted to death in the streets. I doubt a single Swiss guard is still alive by now. They got the worst of it, poor devils. And as for us, good God, the mob hates us even more than they hate the Swiss. That is the reason for this filthy disguise.
He peeled off the shaggy greatcoat and threw it aside. He stepped forward wearing the black satin that had been the uniform of the 100 Knights of the Dagger, the loyal noblemen who had rallied at the Tuileries that morning to defend their king. His coat was torn across the back, and his neckcloth and the ruffles at his wrists were ripped and stained with blood. With his smeared face and messy hair, he was a terrible sight to behold. Yet he still managed to carry himself with his usual easy confidence, even remembering to kiss the trembling hand that Madame de Plougastel extended to welcome him.
You did well to come to me, Gervais,
she said.
Yes, you have sanctuary here for now. You will be quite safe, at least for as long as we are safe ourselves. My servants are completely trustworthy. Sit down and tell me everything.
He obeyed her and practically collapsed into the armchair she pushed forward. He was completely exhausted from physical effort, nervous strain, or perhaps both. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped some of the blood and dirt from his face.
It is a short story,
he said, his tone heavy with the bitterness of despair.
This is the end for us, my dear. Plougastel is lucky to be across the border at a time like this. I should be there myself, if I had not been foolish enough to trust people who proved completely unworthy of it today. My decision to remain in Paris is the crowning foolishness of a life full of mistakes. Coming to you in my hour of most urgent need only proves the point.
He laughed bitterly. Madame moistened her dry lips.
And what now?
She asked him.
We just need to get away as soon as possible if it can still be done. There is no longer any room for us here in France, at least not above ground. Today has proven that much.
Then he looked up at her standing beside him, looking pale and timid, and he smiled. He patted her delicate hand as it rested on the arm of his chair.
My dear Therese, unless your charity extends to giving me a drink, you will see me die of thirst right before your eyes. And that will happen long before the peasant mob gets a chance to finish me off.
She jumped slightly.
I should have thought of that,
she cried in self-reproach, turning quickly.
Aline,
she begged.
Tell Jacques to bring us. Aline,
he echoed, interrupting her and swinging around in his chair. As Aline stood up and stepped out of the shadows, he finally saw her. He pushed himself abruptly onto his weary legs and stood stiffly, bowing to her across the gleaming floor.
Mademoiselle, I did not realize you were here,
he said. He seemed unusually uncomfortable and startled, like a man caught doing something forbidden.
I noticed that, monsieur,
she answered, stepping forward to carry out Madame de Plougastel's request. She paused in front of him.
From the bottom of my heart, monsieur, I am deeply sorry that we must meet again under such painful circumstances.
They had not stood face to face since the day of his duel with André-Louis. That was the day his final hope of winning her heart had died and been buried forever. He stopped himself just as he was about to answer her. His glance drifted over to Madame de Plougastel. Looking oddly hesitant for a man who was usually so smooth with his words, he simply bowed in silence.
Please sit down, monsieur. I beg of you. You are exhausted. You are very kind to notice. With your permission, then I will.
He sat back down in his chair. She continued on her way to the door and left the room to fetch the drinks. When Aline returned a moment later, the two of them had inexplicably changed places. Madame de Plougastel was now sitting in the gilded brocade armchair. The Marquis de la Tour d'Azur, despite his exhaustion, was leaning over the back of it and talking earnestly. His posture made it look as though he were pleading with her. He broke off instantly the moment Aline entered and moved away, leaving her feeling like she had interrupted something private. She also noticed that the Countess was crying. The diligent Jacques followed close behind Aline, carrying a tray loaded with food and wine. Madame poured a glass for her guest, and he drank a deep gulp of the burgundy wine. Then, holding out his grimy hands, he asked for permission to clean himself up before sitting down to eat. Jacques led him away to wash. When the Marquis returned, he had wiped away the last traces of the rough handling he had endured. He looked almost like his normal self again. His torn clothes were adjusted, and his posture was calm, dignified, and polite. Yet his face was very pale and haggard. He seemed to have suddenly aged, looking every bit as old as his true years. He ate and drank with a strong appetite, telling them he had not tasted food since early morning. As he ate, he recounted the terrible events of the day. He described the details of his escape from the Tuileries Palace when all was finally lost. He told them how the Swiss guards had fired their last bullets before being ruthlessly massacred by an incredibly furious mob.
It was all handled very poorly.
He concluded critically.
We were timid when we should have been firm, and we finally became firm when it was already too late. That has been the history of our side since the beginning of this cursed struggle. We have lacked proper leadership from the start, and now, as I have said, we are finished. All that is left is to escape, as soon as we can figure out how to manage it.
Madame told him about her hopes for Regain helping them escape. The news lifted him out of his gloom, and he felt slightly more optimistic.
You are wrong to give up on that hope,
he assured her.
If this mayor is as helpful as you say, he can certainly do what his son promised. But it would have been too late for him to reach you last night. And today, even if he made it to Paris, it would have been almost impossible for him to cross the chaotic streets from the other side of the city. It is very likely that he will still come. I pray that he does. Knowing that you and Mademoiselle de Circadia are safely out of this mess would comfort me more than anything else. We should take you with us,
Madame de Plougastel said.
But how? Young Regain was supposed to bring me travel permits for 3 people. The passes were for Aline, myself, and my footman, Jacques. You could take Jacques' place. My word, madame, there is no man whose place I would not gladly take to get out of Paris right now.
And he laughed. Their spirits lifted along with his, and their fading hopes were revived. But as dusk fell over the city without any sign of their rescuer, those hopes began to fade once again. Finally, the Marquis pleaded weariness. He asked for permission to excuse himself so he could try to get some rest, preparing for whatever they might have to face next. After he left, Madame de Plougastel persuaded Aline to go and lie down as well.
I will wake you the moment he arrives, my dear,
she said. She bravely kept up a pretense of confidence that had completely vanished by now. Aline kissed her affectionately and left the room. She seemed so calm and untroubled on the outside that the Countess wondered if the girl truly realized the danger they were in. Their peril was deeply increased by hiding a man as famous and hated as the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur, someone whose enemies were probably hunting for him at that very moment. Left alone, Madame de Plougastel lay down on a couch in the salon so she could be ready for any emergency. It was a hot summer night, and the glass doors opening out into the lush garden were left wide open to let in the breeze. Carried on that breeze were the intermittent, distant sounds of the mob's continuing horrors. It was the terrifying aftermath of a bloody day. Madame de Plougastel lay there for over an hour, listening to the noise. She thanked heaven that the riots were at least far away for now, but she dreaded that the violence might move closer at any moment. She prayed that her own Bondy district would not become the scene of the same horrors echoing from the south and west parts of the city. The Countess's couch lay in the shadows, as all the lights in the long salon had been blown out. The only remaining light came from a cluster of candles in a heavy silver candelabra. It sat on a round wooden table in the middle of the room, creating an island of light in the surrounding gloom. The clock above the fireplace chimed melodiously to mark 10 o'clock. Suddenly, another sound broke the immediate silence and vibrated through the house. It brought Madame de Plougastel to her feet in a breathless mix of hope and dread. Someone was knocking sharply on the front door downstairs. Agonizing moments of suspense followed, ending when the footman Jacques burst into the room. He looked around wildly, not seeing his mistress at first.
Madam, madam,
He panted, completely out of breath.
what is it, Jacques?
Her voice was perfectly steady, now that she was forced to be brave. She stepped out of the shadows and into the island of candlelight around the table.
There is a man downstairs.
Jacques stammered.
He is asking. He is demanding to see you right away. A man?
She questioned.
He seems to be a government official. At least he is wearing an official sash. He refuses to give a name. He says his name would mean nothing to you, but he insists that he must speak to you in person immediately. An official?
Madame de Plougastel repeated.
An official.
Jacques repeated.
I would not have let him inside, but he demanded it in the name of the nation. Madam, you must tell us what to do. Robert is with me. If you want us to throw him out, whatever it may be. No, my good Jacques.
She was perfectly composed.
If this man intended to harm us, he surely would not have come alone. Bring him to me, and then ask Mademoiselle de Kercadia to join us if she is awake.
Jacques left the room, feeling slightly reassured himself. Madame de Plougastel sat down in the armchair by the table, placing herself clearly in the light. She smoothed her dress with an automatic motion. Her hopes for regain may have been useless, but perhaps her sudden fears were useless too. Just as she had said, a man on anything but a peaceful errand would have brought a squad of men with him. The door opened again, and Jacques reappeared. Stepping briskly past the footman came a slender man wearing a wide-brimmed hat adorned with a tricolor cockade. He wore an olive-green riding coat with a broad revolutionary sash tied around his waist, and a sword hung at his side. He swept off his hat, letting the candlelight glint on its steel buckle. Madame de Plougastel found herself being silently watched by a pair of large, dark eyes set in a lean, brown face. The man's eyes were intensely focused and searching. She leaned forward, and a look of complete disbelief swept across her face. Then her eyes lit up, and color finally crept back into her pale cheeks. She stood up suddenly, trembling all over.
André-Louis,
She exclaimed. Chapter 14. The Barrier. That gift of laughter of his seemed utterly extinguished. For once there was no gleam of humor in those dark eyes as they continued to consider her with that queer stare of scrutiny. And yet, though his gaze was somber, his thoughts were not. With his cruelly true mental vision, which pierced through shams, his capacity for detached observation, which properly applied might have carried him very far indeed, he perceived the grotesqueness and the artificiality of the emotion which he experienced in that moment but refused to be possessed by. It sprang entirely from the consciousness that she was his mother. It was as if, all things considered, the more or less accidental fact that she had brought him into the world could establish any real bond between them at this time of day. The motherhood that bears and forsakes is less than animal. He had considered this. He had been given ample leisure in which to consider it during those long, turbulent hours when he had been forced to wait. It would have been almost impossible to have won across that seething city. It certainly would have been unwise to have attempted to do so. He had reached the conclusion that by consenting to go to her rescue at such a time, he stood committed to a piece of purely sentimental quixotry. The quittances which the mayor of Meudon had exacted from him before he would issue the necessary safe-conducts placed his whole future, perhaps his very life, in jeopardy. He had consented to do this not for the sake of a reality, but out of regard for an idea. This came from a man who all his life had avoided the false lure of worthless and hollow sentimentality. Thus thought André-Louis as he considered her now so searchingly. He found it naturally enough to be a matter of extraordinary interest to look consciously upon his mother for the first time at the age of 28. From her, he looked at last at Jacques, who remained at attention, waiting by the open door. He asked her,
could we be alone, madam?
She waved the footman away, and the door closed. In agitated silence, unquestioning, she waited for him to account for his presence there at such an extraordinary time. He informed her shortly,
Regain could not return. At Monsieur de Circadia's request, I come instead. You are sent to rescue us.
The note of amazement in her voice was stronger than that of her relief.
That, and to make your acquaintance, madam. To make my acquaintance? But what do you mean, André-Louis? This letter from Monsieur de Circadia will tell you.
Intrigued by his odd words and odder manner, she took the folded sheet. She broke the seal with shaking hands and approached the written page to the light. Her eyes grew troubled as she read, and the shaking of her hands increased. Midway through that reading, a moan escaped her. She darted one glance that was almost terror at the slim, straight man standing so incredibly impassive upon the edge of the light. Then she endeavored to read on. But the crabbed characters of Monsieur de Circadia swam distortedly under her eyes. She could not read. Besides, what could it matter what else he said? She had read enough. The sheet fluttered from her hands to the table. Out of a face that was like a face of wax, she looked now at André-Louis with an indescribable wistfulness and sadness. Her voice was stifled to a whisper.
And so you know, my child? I know, madam, my mother.
The grimness and the subtle blend of merciless derision and reproach in which it was uttered completely escaped her. She cried out at the new name. For her in that moment time, and the world stood still. Her peril there in Paris as the wife of an intriguer at Coblentz was blotted out along with every other consideration. It was thrust out of a consciousness that could find room for nothing else beside the fact that she stood acknowledged by her only son. This was the child begotten in adultery, born furtively, and in shame in a remote Brittany village 28 years ago. In this supreme moment, she could not even spare a thought for the betrayal of that inviolable secret or the consequences that might follow. She took one or two faltering steps towards him, hesitating. Then she opened her arms. Sobs suffocated her voice.
Won't you come to me, André-Louis?
He stood hesitating for a moment, startled by that appeal, angered almost by his heart's response to it, as reason and sentiment grappled in his soul. His reason postulated that this was not real. This poignant emotion that she displayed and that he experienced was fantastic. Yet he went. Her arms enfolded him, and her wet cheek was pressed hard against his own. Her frame, which the years had not yet succeeded in robbing of its grace, was shaken by the passionate storm within her.
Oh, André-Louis, my child, if you knew how I have hungered to hold you so, if you knew how in denying myself this I have atoned and suffered, Circadia should not have told you, not even now. It was wrong, most wrong, perhaps, to you. It would have been better that he should have left me here to my fate, whatever that may be. And yet, come what may of this, to be able to hold you so, to be able to acknowledge you, to hear you call me mother, oh, André-Louis, I cannot now regret it. I cannot wish it otherwise.
He asked her, his stoicism deeply shaken.
Is there any need, madam? There is no occasion to take others into our confidence. This is for tonight alone. Tonight we are mother and son. Tomorrow we resume our former places and outwardly at least forget. Forget? Have you no heart, André-Louis?
The question recalled him curiously to his attitude towards life. This was that histrionic attitude of his that he accounted true philosophy. Also he remembered what lay before them, and he realized that he must master not only himself, but her. To yield too far to sentiment at such a time might be the ruin of them all. He said,
It is a question propounded to me so often that it must contain the truth. My rearing is to blame for that.
She tightened her clutch about his neck even as he would have attempted to disengage himself from her embrace.
You do not blame me for your rearing? Knowing all as you do, André-Louis, you cannot altogether blame me. You must be merciful to me. You must forgive me. You must. I had no choice. When we know all of whatever it may be, we can never do anything but forgive, madam. That is the profoundest religious truth that was ever written. Contains, in fact, a whole religion. It is the noblest religion any man could have to guide him. I say this for your comfort, madam, my mother.
She sprang away from him with a startled cry. Beyond him in the shadows by the door a pale figure shimmered ghostly. It advanced into the light and resolved itself into Aline. She had come in answer to that forgotten summons Madame had sent her by Jacques. Entering unperceived, she had seen André-Louis in the embrace of the woman whom he addressed as mother. She had recognized him instantly by his voice. She could not have said what bewildered her more, his presence there or the thing she overheard. Madame exclaimed,
"You heard, Aline?"
She broke off and looked at André-Louis long and curiously.
"I could not help it, madam. You sent for me. I am sorry if—"
She was pale but quite composed. She held out her hand to him. She said,
"And so you have come at last, André. You might have come before."
His answer was,
"I come when I am wanted, which is the only time in which one can be sure of being received."
He said it without bitterness. Having said it, he stooped to kiss her hand. He said gently, half pleading,
"You can forgive me what is past. I hope, since I failed of my purpose. I could not have come to you pretending that the failure was intentional, as a compromise between the necessities of the case and your own wishes, for it was not that. And yet you do not seem to have profited by my failure. You are still a maid."
She turned her shoulder to him. She said,
"There are things that you will never understand."
He acknowledged,
Life, for one. I confess that I am finding it bewildering. The very explanations calculated to simplify it seem but to complicate it further.
And he looked at Madame de Plougastel. Mademoiselle said,
You mean something, I suppose.
It was the Countess who spoke.
Aline.
She knew the danger of half-discoveries.
I can trust you, child, I know. André-Louis, I am sure, will offer no objection.
She had taken up the letter to show it to Aline. Yet first her eyes questioned him. He assured her,
Oh, none, madam. It is entirely a matter for yourself.
Aline looked from one to the other with troubled eyes, hesitating to take the letter that was now proffered. When she had read it through, she very thoughtfully replaced it on the table. A moment she stood there with bowed head, the other two watching her. Then impulsively she ran to Madame and put her arms about her. It was a cry of wonder, almost of joy.
Aline, you do not utterly abhor me.
Aline said,
My dear.
And kissed the tear-stained face that seemed to have grown years older in these last few hours. In the background, André-Louis, steeling himself against emotionalism, spoke with the voice of Scaramouche.
It would be well, mesdames, to postpone all transports until they can be indulged at greater leisure and in more security. It is growing late. If we are to get out of this shambles, we should be wise to take the road without more delay.
It was a tonic as effective as it was necessary. It startled them into remembrance of their circumstances, and under the spur of it, they went at once to make their preparations. They left him for perhaps a quarter of an hour, to pace that long room alone, saved only from impatience by the turmoil of his mind. When at length they returned, they were accompanied by a tall man in a full-skirted shaggy greatcoat and a broad hat the brim of which was turned down all around. He remained respectfully by the door in the shadows. Between them the two women had concerted it thus. Or rather, the Countess had so concerted it when Aline had warned her that André-Louis' bitter hostility towards the Marquis made it unthinkable that he should move a finger consciously to save him. Now, despite the close friendship uniting Monsieur de Kercadia and his niece with Madame de Plougastel, there were several matters concerning them of which the Countess was in ignorance. One of these was the project at one time existing of a marriage between Aline and Monsieur de la Tour-d'Azur. It was a matter that Aline, naturally enough in the state of her feelings, had never mentioned, nor had Monsieur de Kercadia ever alluded to it since his coming to Meudon, by when he had perceived how unlikely it was ever to be realized. Monsieur de la Tour-d'Azur's concern for Aline on that morning of the duel, when he had found her half-swooning in Madame de Plougastel's carriage, had been of a circumspection that betrayed nothing of his real interest in her. Therefore it had appeared no more than natural in one who must account himself the cause of her distress. Similarly, Madame de Plougastel had never realized, nor did she realize now, for Aline did not trouble fully to enlighten her, that the hostility between the two men was other than political. The quarrel was other than that which already had taken André-Louis to the Bois on every day of the preceding week. But, at least, she realized that even if André-Louis' rancor should have no other source, yet that inconclusive duel was cause enough for Aline's fears. And so she had proposed this obvious deception, and Aline had consented to be a passive party to it. They had made the mistake of not fully forewarning and persuading Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr. They had trusted entirely to his anxiety to escape from Paris to keep him rigidly within the part imposed upon him. They had reckoned without the queer sense of honor that moved such men as the Marquis, nurtured upon a code of shams. André-Louis, turning to scan that muffled figure, advanced from the dark depths of the salon. As the light beat on his white, lean-faced the pseudo-footman started. The next moment he too stepped forward into the light, and swept his broad-brimmed hat from his brow. As he did so, André-Louis observed that his hand was fine and white, and that a jewel flashed from one of the fingers. Then he caught his breath, and stiffened in every line as he recognized the face revealed to him. That stern, proud man was saying,
Monsieur, I cannot take advantage of your ignorance. If these ladies can persuade you to save me, at least it is due to you that you shall know whom you are saving.
He stood there by the table very erect and dignified, ready to perish as he had lived, if perish he must, without fear and without deception. André-Louis came slowly forward until he reached the table on the other side. Then at last the muscles of his set face relaxed, and he laughed. Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr frowned, offended.
You laugh?
André-Louis said.
It is so damnably amusing. You have an odd sense of humor, Monsieur Moreau. Oh, admitted, the unexpected always moves me so. I have found you many things in the course of our acquaintance. Tonight you are the one thing I never expected to find you. An honest man.
Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr quivered, but he attempted no reply.
Because of that, monsieur, I am disposed to be clement. It is probably a foolishness, but you have surprised me into it. I give you 3 minutes, monsieur, in which to leave this house, and to take your own measures for your safety. What afterwards happens to you shall be no concern of mine.
Madame began in anguish.
Ah no, André, listen. Pardon, madame. It is the utmost that I will do, and already I am violating what I conceive to be my duty. If Monsieur de la Tour d'Azyr remains, he not only ruins himself, but he imperils you. For unless he departs at once, he goes with me to the headquarters of the section. The section will have his head on a pike inside the hour. He is a notorious counter-revolutionary, a knight of the dagger, one of those whom an exasperated populace is determined to exterminate. Now, monsieur, you know what awaits you. Resolve yourself, and at once, for these ladies' sake.
Madame de Plougastel's condition was one of anguish indescribable. She came to him and clutched his arm.
But you don't know, André-Louis. For the love of heaven, André-Louis, be merciful with him. You must. But that is what I am being, madame, merciful. More merciful than he deserves. And he knows it. Fate has meddled most oddly in our concerns to bring us together tonight. Almost it is as if fate were forcing retribution at last upon him. Yet, for your sakes, I take no advantage of it, provided that he does at once as I have desired him.
And now from beyond the table the Marquis spoke icily, and as he spoke his right hand stirred under the ample folds of his greatcoat.
I am glad, Monsieur Moreau, that you take that tone with me. You relieve me of the last scruple. You spoke of fate just now. I must agree with you that fate has meddled oddly, though perhaps not to the end that you discern. For years now you have chosen to stand in my path and thwart me at every turn, holding over me a perpetual menace. Persistently you have sought my life in various ways, first indirectly and at last directly. Your intervention in my affairs has ruined my highest hopes, more effectively, perhaps, than you suppose. Throughout you have been my evil genius, and you are even one of the agents of this climax of despair that has been reached by me tonight.
Madame was panting. She flung away from André-Louis, as if moved by some premonition of what was coming.
Wait, listen, Gervais, this is horrible. Horrible, perhaps, but inevitable. Himself he has invited it. I am a man in despair, the fugitive of a lost cause. That man holds the keys of escape. And, besides, between him and me there is a reckoning to be paid.
His hand came from beneath the coat at last, and it came armed with a pistol. Madame de Plougastel screamed and flung herself upon him. On her knees now, she clung to his arm with all her strength and might. Vainly he sought to shake himself free of that desperate clutch. He cried,
Therese, are you mad? Will you destroy me and yourself? This creature has the safe conducts that mean our salvation. Himself, he is nothing.
From the background, Aline, a breathless, horror-stricken spectator of that scene, spoke sharply. Her quick mind pointed out the line of checkmate.
Burn the safe conducts, André-Louis. Burn them at once in the candles there.
But André-Louis had taken advantage of that moment of Monsieur de la Tour d'Azur's impotence to draw a pistol in his turn. He said,
I think it will be better to burn his brains instead. Stand away from him, madame.
Far from obeying that imperious command, Madame de Plougastel rose to her feet to cover the Marquis with her body. But she still clung to his arm. She clung to it with unsuspected strength that continued to prevent him from attempting to use the pistol. She panted hoarsely over her shoulder.
André, for God's sake, André.
He commanded her again, more sternly.
Stand away, madame, and let this murderer take his due. He is jeopardizing all our lives, and his own has been forfeit these years. Stand away.
He sprang forward with intent now to fire at his enemy over her shoulder, and Aline moved too late to hinder him.
André, André.
Panting, gasping, haggard of face, on the verge almost of hysteria, the distracted countess flung at last an effective and terrible barrier between the hatred of those men, each intent upon taking the other's life.
He is your father, André. Gervais. He is your son, our son. The letter there on the table, oh my God.
And she slipped nervelessly to the ground, crouched there sobbing at the feet of Monsieur de la Tour d'Azur.